Tonight's program is presented in conjunction with the exhibition Carrie Mae Weems, The Usual Suspects, which was organized by the Louisiana State University Museum of Art. And it'll be on view here through May 3rd. I'm John Weber, the director of the JSMA. If all goes as planned, as you may have heard if you've been here for a while, Carrie Mae will be coming to campus April 23rd to receive an honorary doctorate. And she's scheduled to speak at Straub Hall that day at 4 o'clock, and we're planning a reception for her at the JSMA at 5:30 that day. She's also working on a new commission for a Percent for Art project that will be at Chapman Hall. Of course, all of this, her trip that is subject to conditions surrounding the coronavirus, and so please stay tuned. We'll see how that works. But tonight, we are delighted to have Katie Delmez here, virtually, but very present there, to talk about Carrie Mae's career, the work really preceding the body of work that we have on view in The Usual Suspects. And she is the perfect person to do this because she organized the major retrospective that toured the United States in 2013 and 2014. Some of you may have seen it in Portland. I saw it at the Cantor Art Center at Stanford at that time. And when I asked Carrie Mae who would be her top choice to discuss her work, she said Katie Delmez from the Frist Museum of Art. She has been curator at the Frist since 2001, and during that time organized exhibitions such as Terry Adkins, Our Sons and Daughters Ever on the Altar, We Shall Overcome. Now, is that the title of that show?
Terry's show was
yeah.
Our Sons and Daughters Ever on the Altar. That's a Fisk motto dating back to its founding in the late 19th century.
Okay. And also, We Shall Overcome, Civil Rights in the Nashville Press, 1957 to 1968. Nick Cave, Feet, Slavery, the Prison Industrial System, photographs by Keith Calhoun and Chandra McCormick, and Shinke Smith, Wonder and Rainbows, among others. The retrospective of Carrie Mae Weems' work traveled to 4 venues, including the Guggenheim Museum in New York. And Katie Delmez has also been the editor of a number of accompanying books and overseeing the presentation of more than 35 touring exhibitions at the Frist. She's a graduate of Vanderbilt University and Boston University. Please join me in welcoming Katie.
Thank you, John, and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I will go ahead and admit that this is the first time I've presented in this way, so I just want to thank first the staff at the Schnitzer Museum for being so flexible and for facilitating this change of plans that really does allow me to still speak on an artist who has occupied much of my art historical headspace in conjunction with your exhibition, The Usual Suspects, on view through May. It really is such an honor to have been asked, but I must admit that I was relieved to learn that I would be speaking after Carrie does, because if you don't know yet, you will soon discover, I hope, that she is an incredible orator and a very hard act to follow. But as John said, my plan tonight is to kind of provide a bit of an overview of her career up to the most current bodies of work. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that may arise. So I think now we are going to get the PowerPoint up. Is that, Paul, does that sound right?
Yes, that sounds great.
Great. Okay, so let's go ahead. I think you're going to lose me, but you're going to get to see some of Carrie's works.
I think we'll see a little bit, a small version.
Yeah, we'll see a small window.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'll just start talking. Let me know if there's anything we need to do on our end. We've got Kurt here. This is not the beginning, for what it's worth. Okay. All right, so to provide a little more background on me and why I'm here, it may be helpful to know that I first began studying Carrie Mae Weems' work when I was in graduate school in the late 1990s. And ultimately, I wrote my master's thesis on her Sea Island series. Naturally, I continued to follow her work once I became a curator and was planning on including her in a group exhibition when art critic Colin Cotter of the New York Times asked in 2008 Why hasn't Carrie Mae Weems had a mid-career museum retrospective? No American photographer of the last quarter century has turned out a more probing, varied, and moving body of work. And a copy of that review was on my desk at the Frist Art Museum here in Nashville Monday morning with a note from our director saying, why not give this a try? So here's a picture of Carrie from years ago. But 4 years later, that long overdue retrospective, comprised of over 200 photographs, videos, and text pieces made over the course of 30 years, opened in Nashville. And here you can see our title wall. And then it traveled to 4 other venues, including, as you know, the Portland Art Museum not far from you, and the Guggenheim Museum in New York, where she became the first African-American female artist to have a solo show. And although portions of Carrie's work had been seen at museums and galleries across the globe, that exhibition was the first on a large scale to trace the evolution of her career. From her earliest black and white documentary photographs of the mid-70s, John, you might remember some of these, to the increasingly layered and complex color, digital, and moving images of more recent times, and the various conceptual links between them. The exhibition's tour ended in May of 2014, and as Carrie and I reflected on the phone this weekend, a lot has happened since then. Michael Brown was killed in August of that year. The Me Too movement emerged in full force in 2017. And of course, there was that election in 2016. Like after grad school, I've been carefully watching Carrie from afar to see how these things, these seismic shifts in the American landscape, manifest in her work. And through this invitation, I've had reason to take a closer look on her recent work. And so I want to thank you again for this very welcomed opportunity. So throughout her socially and politically motivated practice, which now spans 40 years, Weems's work has asked provoking questions on issues surrounding equity as it relates to race, gender, and class. She is interested in assessing who constructs power paradigms, history, and identity, how they are formed, and why. Often, Weems moves beyond the specific to address broad humanitarian struggles against entrenched oppressive practices. And under these overarching concerns, careful reading of the work also reveals the artist's interests in more particular, yet still related subjects. For instance, the role of architecture in the establishment of power relations, the notion of invention, what motivates people to create new modes of expression, what is the impact of the development, and is its proper credit given to the originator? She's also interested in the content and marketing of current mainstream media. Up until recently, for example, why were there no complex African-American figures on primetime television? And why are blonde-haired women still so often used to sell products, despite the so-called browning of America? Weems states, I'm committed to radical social change. Any form of human injustice moves me deeply. The battle against all forms of oppression keeps me going and keeps me focused. And she believes that my responsibility as an artist is to make art beautiful and powerful, that adds and reveals, to beautify the mess of a messy world, to heal the sick and feed the helpless, to shout bravely from the rooftops and storm barricaded doors and voice the specifics of our historic moment. She is very ambitious and committed to this cause. And although the subjects of her work are often African Americans, Weems wants people of color to stand for the human multitudes and for her art to resonate with audiences of all backgrounds. That is, it should be seen as a representation of all oppressed and marginalized figures, no matter their background, faith, gender, sexual identity, or race. So with that broad framework laid, let's dive in. Carrie Mae Weems was born in 1953 in Portland, Oregon. She was the second of 5 children to Carrie Polk and Merrill Weems. Scholar Henry Louis Gates Jr. credits this childhood in the Northwest as an influential factor in the artist's development. He notes in his foreword to the catalog that accompanied our exhibition, Weems' family followed a different migratory path than most Black families in this country, moving from Mississippi to Portland, Oregon. Perhaps it was this doubly unique experience to grow up Black in a largely white environment and to grow up Black in an environment unlike that experienced by most African Americans that gave Weems her strikingly original perspective that made her acutely aware of how a community's stories about itself and about the world outside affects the individual's understanding of and construction of herself. And from a young age, Weems sought to better understand the world surrounding her. She initially thought insight might be revealed through studying such fields as genetics, anthropology, or astronomy. But at the age of 17, she moved to the San Francisco Bay Area to explore the possibilities. She became involved in grassroots political efforts, which was in keeping with a long family tradition of activism. Her grandfather was president of a tenants farmers union in Mississippi, something she's become more interested in recently. And she joined Anna Halprin's formally and ideologically progressive San Francisco Dancers Workshop. In addition for being known for avant-garde dance and working with such figures as Merce Cunningham and John Cage, Halprin's workshop was also one of the first multiracial dance groups and often performed with a socially minded intent. And I really think this experience shaped Carrie. You see her in later works really using her body and moving with much intentionality and very deliberately in her later photographic practice. Weems's creative focus shifted to photography in 1974, when a friend gave her a camera for her 21st birthday. She quickly realized its potential as a tool for tangibly expressing the more abstract political and social theories that she was interested in, and for inciting change. She studied the work of well-known documentary photographers like Henry Cartier-Bresson and Robert Frank, the American. But perhaps more important, by looking at images by Roy DeCarava and other African-American photographers she saw in the Black Photographers Annual, Weems saw the medium's ability to rewrite Black cultural myths and provide counterpoints to negative perceptions and stereotypes. She saw the ability to present positive, yet realistic and authentic images of a distinct African-American culture. Cultural historian Maurice Berger summarizes this capability in his book For All the World to See. By taking pictures of themselves, African Americans could participate in their own image making and thus provide what a century of mainstream culture would not: the ongoing confirmation of their humanity, complexity, beauty, and cultural and intellectual authority. Weems began taking photography classes at the Studio Museum in Harlem with Dowood Bey and returned to the West Coast, but then returned to the West Coast to pursue a formal education in photography. She ultimately received a BFA from California Institute of Arts in 1981 and an MFA in photography from the University of California in San Diego in 1984. And during these studies, she often looked to other departments outside of the art department, such as English and history, for inspiration. And she became increasingly interested in the field of folklore, which we'll talk about a little more shortly. In her earliest works, Weems photographed elements of surrounding communities and issues relating to contemporary African-American experiences. She made her first major body of work, Family Pictures and Stories, as part of her MFA thesis. Dissatisfied with the representations, what few there were, of African Americans in general, and the perception of Black families in particular, she created an in-depth portrait of her own large and close-knit family in a project composed of 30 photographs and as well as written and spoken narratives. The series was made largely in response to a written report in 1965 by Assistant Secretary of Labor Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and the Moynihan Report described the Black family as being in a state of crisis. At the heart of the deterioration of the fabric of Negro society is the deterioration of the Negro family. It is the fundamental source of the weakness of the Negro community. It went on to blame a matriarchal family structure for this perceived corrosion. Now, the Moynihan Report is often regarded currently as the beginning of the concept of blaming the victim for their situation, not surrounding economic, social, or political circumstances. But still bothered by these claims nearly 15 years after its release, Weems countered the study generated by a white sociologist who later became a powerful US senator through an intimate yet unvarnished look at the modern day middle-class African-American family with which she was most familiar. The candid black and white photographs depict her parents, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, and aunts and uncles engaged in everyday activities, at work, caring for their children, relaxing, even arguing. Her father, to whom she was very close, holds a prominent position. As in many traditional family photo albums and earlier pictorial essays like Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee and Walker Evans, and The Sweet Flypaper of Life by Langston Hughes and Roy de Carava, captions printed below, you can't really see them in this installation shot, but here's a detail. Captions printed below several images provide further information on the people and situations depicted. For example, it amazes me that even in the midst of a bunch of crazy, wild kids, my sisters will still manage to carry on a halfway decent conversation. I'm really impressed. Also accompanying the photographs is an audio recording, and if you look in the corner, there's don't use, yes, sorry, I used the pointer. Let's get that back up. Kirk will get us back to our position, I'm sure, very soon here. But in the corner of that installation shot, there is a box that is playing an audio recording of Weems, thank you, one more, there you go. Sorry about that. Recording aspects of the family's shared history, particularly life in Tennessee and Mississippi before the Polks and Weemses migrated to Oregon, how her parents and grandparents met, and how the family has resisted racial injustices for multiple generations. As evident through these two narrative components, text and audio, Weems considers herself as much a storyteller as a photographer. And like artists such as Ed Ruscha and Jenny Holzer, language, either written or spoken, plays a vital role in her work from this early stage on. Words ranging in style from vernacular to poetic accompany her images in a variety of ways. Inscriptions on the photographic paper or mat, as we see in this body of work, standalone panels, and etched or even etched into a frame's glass. The words are there not so much to describe a picture, but to activate it, as Weems says, and to provide another point of entry for the viewer. Returning back to family pictures and stories, Weems did not hide the various problems her family faced, like we all do, including infidelity, domestic violence, and teenage pregnancies, even if those aren't a particular family's issues. However, by presenting these issues within a broader context, not simply as statistics, a more complete and empathetic view is provided. Ultimately, Weems bestows value on her family, and by extension on other under-recognized peoples, by giving artistic form to largely ignored experiences. And this mode of resisting classification by outsiders through photography follows the path of other African Americans as James Vanderzee, Charles Teeny Harris, in addition, of course, to De Carava. So while working on family pictures and stories and struggling to find what she called the particularity of my own voice in relation to others, Weems discovered the work of writer Zora Neale Hurston. After reading her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, on a long bus ride from San Francisco to San Diego, Weems immediately claimed she was a changed girl. She finally realized and had confidence in her own possibilities as a visual artist. She proceeded to read all of Hurston's other books, including her collections of folklore. Although today, of course, Hurston is better known for her fiction, she was indeed one of the first Black anthropologists to study African American folklore, studying at both Barnard College and Columbia University in the 20s and early 30s. Weems later paid homage to Hurston's inspiration in a 2003 project devoted to the author's hometown of Eatonville, Florida, stating, as you can see here, she appeared as my guardian angel, leading me along the dust tracks in the road and back to the meaning of myself. Through Hurston's writings and her experiences making family pictures and stories, Weems became increasingly aware of and interested in cultural folklore because of its inherent unmediated qualities and its ability to provide more authentic insight into the people who created it than official written accounts. Wanting to learn more, she enrolled in a graduate program in folklore at the University of California, Berkeley, to study with noted scholar Alan Dundas. There, she concentrated on oral traditions and storytelling within African American and African communities. Although she initially saw folklore and photography as separate undertakings, Weems soon began to incorporate folklore and vernacular traditions into her art in order to provide a greater sense of familiarity, directness, and intimacy with the viewer. Influenced by Dundee's studies in humor, a form of folklore that can provide perhaps a more socially acceptable way to promote officially unacceptable ideologies, Weems created Ain't Jokin', a series composed of unflinching combinations of staged photographs and racist jokes or notions. By taking these jokes out of the locker room or country club and into a public setting reserved for viewing art, Weems wants viewers to acknowledge the persistence of an undercurrent of racism within our culture and to consider our own responses to the works in both private and public environments, and our potential role as accomplice, be it as a participant or simply a silent witness. In the image on the left, the man's humanity and dignity is expressed through his jacket, his serious and direct gaze into the camera. And that stands in direct contrast to the bigoted attitude towards perceived Black physical features and work ethic below. The other image on the right brings to light long-held mainstream ideals of female beauty. American Icons is another series in which Weems demonstrates how aspects of mainstream popular culture can perpetuate negative stereotypes and debilitating prejudices. Here she looks at Black memorabilia, caricatured Sambo and Mammy figures, among others, situated within average American homes to remind the audience of a mechanism that may seem harmless to some, but has helped to maintain racist attitudes of naivete and unsophistication. Artists such as Renee Cox and Fred Wilson also address the image of Black people in forms of material culture. However, by photographing these objects as Weems does, placed innocuously on a kitchen counter or a desk or a side table, she additionally comments on the ubiquity these seemingly benign knickknacks have had in many white persons' daily life. Moving chronologically, Weems' next series, Colored People, investigates the beauty to be found in the range of skin tones encompassed within the term Black, while also critiquing the self-perpetuating hierarchy of social value assigned to skin tones within the African American community. Portraits of various youth have been tinted a color to correspond to various labels, such as blue, Black boy, golden, yellow, girl. The coloring of the photographs alludes to the artificiality of these naming traditions, but also underscores the vibrancy of this inherent breadth and diversity. Through the title of the series, Weems also reclaims a once pejorative term used to identify African Americans and their drinking fountains, restrooms, waiting rooms, and other public facilities in the Jim Crow era, and represents it as a potential signifier of pride. And here's a detail of one of the works. Colorism continued to be a concept of interest to Weems, even in what some thought might be a post-racial era during the Obama years. She reworked the series 20 years later by removing the classifying labels, rearranging the individual portraits, and adding bright monochromatic square panels, as you can see here. And this work greets visitors to the U.S. mission to the United States in New York, or I should rephrase that, it used to at least be there, or in 2012 it was there, who knows now, but it was meant to announce our multifaceted character to a global audience. Okay, so the Kitchen Table series is arguably Weems' most well-known body of work, and it continued to reject and redefine the way in which marginalized figures are represented. Weems was inspired by the influential essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, written in 1975 by critic Laura Mulvey, which addressed the lack of non-objectified representations of women in film and other cultural expressions. Weems was also concerned by the demure way in which many of her female students at Hampshire College, where she was teaching then, were picturing themselves. They always seemed to be covering them up or kind of hiding from the camera. Like family pictures and stories, Kitchen Table offers a valid portrait of an often overlooked subject, in this case, a modern Black woman, quote, the other of the other, as Michelle Wallace asserts in her 1978 book, Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. The photographs and accompanying text panels tell the complicated story of a woman experiencing the blossoming, then loss of love, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the desire to be an engaged and contributing member of her community. The woman is Weems herself, a formal practice that will continue throughout the next decades of her career as she physically inserts herself into her compositions, becoming both subject and photographer, performer, and director, and blurring the distinction between participant and observer. Her reasons for doing this vary from the practicality of using an available body, as she says was the case in remote Western Massachusetts when she made this series, to the conceptual desire to inscribe my presence in the things I consider important. I insert myself as the narrator of history. And she wants to use my own skin to sympathize and experience something larger than myself. The role of words has become even more prominent than in previous works, with 14 standalone text panels that relay the at times rocky narrative. And you can see a portion or an example of one of those here. She says, she went on to tell him that in the face of the daily force, she understood his misgivings, but they were a 50-50 thing, equals. Near the end of the series, the woman stands alone, strong and self-reliant, looking directly at the viewer with her arms squarely planted on her kitchen table, where the entire story has unfolded under what Weems calls a light of interrogation. Again, it is important to note that while the Kitchen Table series depicts a Black subject and is loosely related on her own life, Weems strives for it to reflect the experiences of every woman and to resonate across racial, class, and even gender boundaries, for the personal to become universal and for the Black figure to be empowered to represent humanity as a whole. And part of the success, in my mind, of this body of work and Weems's in general rests on images like this one. I think she very much succeeds in the universal. Who hasn't had a moment like this? And for those of you, if there's anyone in the audience that was born after 2000, that thing in the foreground is what we call a landline, and we used to wait for it to ring. rather than our texts. Jumping ahead almost 20 years is this video from 2009 that explores the construction of female identity through the presentation of several women wearing, as you can see, exaggerated Afro hairstyles and sassy attire as they strut down an illuminated runway. The figures range in age and are both black and white, reflecting a near universal, yet sometimes repressed desire to boldly express one's inner beauty. As you can see, a vintage poster of Angela Davis sporting her famous and inspiring for many women of color natural hairdo hangs behind the catwalk, a nod to her role in the formation of the concept that Black is beautiful. In addition to investigating notions of identity and the fullness of being, a desire to more fully understand the present moment by looking to the past is found throughout Weems's work. She has made several series in response to specific historical situations, both well-known and obscure to some, that have affected the collective experience of African Americans and thereby history as a whole. These 4 works are part of a series of 34 images that lay out the history of Black subjects in photography and the larger social perceptions that accompany them. This powerful and emotionally charged body of work was created at the invitation of the J. Paul Getty Museum in response to an exhibition they were organizing of African Americans in early photography. Weems's resulting series examines the broader history of Black subjects and images taken by white photographers, from early pseudoscientific daguerreotypes intended to justify racism through physiognomy, which I'm sure you know is the use of facial features to judge somebody's character and temperament that was popular in the late 19th century, to sexually charged depictions of men and women that bolster a stereotype of heightened sexuality. All of the portraits are appropriated or pre-existing, as the artist states, a bold methodology Weems uses to call into question the original intention and current ownership and dissemination of the representations. A practice, in fact, that has gotten her into trouble with the copyright holders of these images and others more than once. In fact, she loves to talk about how some of the daguerreotypes were owned by Harvard University, and they were concerned about copyright. They threatened to sue her. They started to sue her, and at the end of everything, they ended up acquiring the work. So a really interesting look at ownership there. The round black mats suggest looking through a camera lens or down the barrel of a rifle at the images, which have been manipulated or have been enlarged to a consistent size and tinted a bright blood red. Weems further manipulates the representations and makes them her own by etching poignant words related to the accompanying photo and the resulting societal image. You can see here, you became playmate to the patriarch and their daughter. Through these reinterpretations, the artist dismantles these negative intentions and aims to restore a level of humanity and dignity to these men and women who historically have had no voice. 2 mirrored images of a royal Mangbetu woman bookends the pictures. So in an installation, these 2 works are on the side, and then the red works are in the middle of these 2. Printed a somber shade of blue, she, like the artist, observes and mourns the heartbreaking fate of her people with the words, "From here I saw what happened and I cried." Of this series, Weems has stated, "It is one of the more painful pieces that I've made. When I look at it, when I study it, I cry. It is a very sad piece, and at the same time, of course, there's always hope that's located within sadness as well. The hope that in the end, our mutual humanity will be understood and embraced." The Jefferson Suite, one of 3 gallery-sized fabric installations that Weems created in the late 1990s, was inspired by a specific moment in history, the 1998 DNA test that proved a sexual relationship between Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings. The work simultaneously explores the capacity of science to provide historic correctiveness and reveal truths that have been hidden by people in power, while underscoring the hypocrisy of an advocate for human rights who was also a slave owner. Muslin banners printed with Weems photographs and more appropriated historic images hang from the ceiling and create a chamber through which the viewer must walk. A musical score and narrative entitled Let the Record Show adds further sensory experiences for the viewer participant. Images range from depictions of Dolly, the first cloned sheep, the first test tube baby that you can see in the picture below, Timothy Wilson Spencer, the first person executed for murder based solely on DNA evidence, to reenactments of the Jefferson, Hemings, and Clinton Lewinsky affairs. And you can see the Jefferson Hemings recreation here. Created a year later, the Hampton Project critically examines the connections between race and education in particular, as experienced at Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institution, now Hampton University. Founded in Virginia in 1868, the school provided an education and vocational training not only for recently freed African Americans, but also young Native Americans. The students were stripped of cultural specificities in favor of conformity and forced assimilation. Weems reveals and grieves for this loss by appropriating, again, and deconstructing images taken in 1899 by a photojournalist named Francis Benjamin Johnston for the explicit purpose of demonstrating the success of this seemingly enlightened program. Many photographs have been enlarged and printed onto thin muslin banners, as we saw in the Jefferson Suite, transforming the subjects into looming, ghost-like figures of the past. Weems adds somber narratives such as leaving blankets and chains at the door, you checked in one way and came out another. And this is, in my mind, one of the most powerful pieces or portions of that. In one triptych, she brackets a photograph of the white founder of the school and his family between an image of 10 Native Americans, 10 boys in traditional Native American dress, and then one on the right of them in Western attire, taken after acquiring, quote, acquiring the ways of the patriarch. And in my mind, this is a really clear example of the intersectionality that we see running throughout Weems's work. Closely related to this investigation into who writes history and why is the 2008 series, Constructing History, A Requiem to Mark the Moment. Using students from a class Weems taught as an artist in residence at Savannah College of Art and Design, this body of work presents staged reenactments of important moments in the global quest for civil and human rights. The constructed nature of history and our perception of it through the media, or at least as the media stood in 2008, obviously a lot has changed since then, is underscored through the inclusion of a lighting track, pedestals, and the cameras used on set. And we'll see that, more of that, I think, in other photos. The images are based on well-known photos, like the Zapruder JFK video that you can see referred to here, or Moneta Sleet's photo of Coretta Scott King. And here you can see more of that set that I was mentioning. And they're showing such critical events as the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which she entitles The First Major Blow, Martin Luther King Jr., and more recently, Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan. She depicts other instances of oppression and violence from the last several decades, including the disfigurement of Japanese children caused by the atomic bombs of World War II, to merciless killings in Vietnam and Kent State. However, in the accompanying film, Weems notes that this history, while exceedingly tragic, was what made it possible for the major, unprecedented milestone that was occurring when the series was being made. In the spring of 2008, of course, a woman and a Black man were the leading candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination. She believes Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were, quote, standing on the ashes in spirit of all that has come before. And in this way, she connects history with contemporary occurrences. And I'd like to show just a little bit of this film, if we can get that running. Let me see how we're doing on time. We could go to like 10-ish.
Exhausted from the tyranny, the lies, the manipulation, the mystery, the mayhem, the assassination, we stumble into the mid-century strung out, stunned, looking back over our shoulders, the strategic manipulation of politics and public opinion has had its way. Your time. It is the murder of Medgar Evers. The assassination of Martin. The assassination of Gandhi. The public assassination of John F. Kennedy. The assassination and murder of innocent students. The prime-time assassination of Robert Kennedy. The assassination of Che Guevara. Assassination of Allende. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba. The assassinations, the assassinations, the assassinations. The brutal assassination of millions of Jews. Jews gasped for the size of their nose, the bent of an ear. For religious belief, for the jobs they held, for the trades they applied, the color of their skin, the texture of their hair, the place of origin.
Okay, sorry to cut that off. I will tell you that it is available on YouTube. So if you want to see, and I encourage you to see the whole video, it's about 20 minutes long, and I think it's among her strongest video pieces. I definitely hope you can check it out. But in making both the photographs and the film for this series, the use of the young people, the SCAD students, was very important to Weems. She wanted the students who only knew about these events from what they saw in the history books or through our archived media to really feel what happened. She believes that through the act of performance with our own bodies, we are allowed to experience and connect the historical past to the present, to the now, to the moment. And this act of performance is an important part of Weems's work, whether it be with her own body, that of collaborators, or of viewers themselves as they walk through an installation. So it was around this time that Weems really began to work seriously in video. She had done some video work in her undergraduate years, but this was her first major endeavor into the medium. And she states, "I think of video as a way of extending the vocabulary of my photographic work. The influence of filmmakers Chris Marker, Maya Deren, and Federico Fellini can be seen through her typically nonlinear assemblage of poetic scenes that create a dreamlike sense of fantasy," certainly exemplified by the image on the screen now. That's the video that didn't play. Okay, so I don't have a clip of this video, I just have these two stills. It demonstrates Weems's continued interest in establishing links between the past and the present. The two-channel work is made from footage of the riots that occurred in Boston in the late 1960s and 70s, surrounding the passing of the 1965 Racial Imbalance Act, which ordered Massachusetts public schools to desegregate through enforced busing. The initiative met with much resistance, especially from lower and middle-class white ethnic groups in South Boston. By slowing down the footage of one particular encounter between opposing sides and replacing the hateful taunts with actually the score from Constructing History, Weems shines a light on the poignancy and futility of the tragedy. And she also seems to be commenting on the increasingly polarization and lacking of listening to the other side in America today. And it almost seems cute when you think that in 2012, the biggest lack of listening to the other side was happening in Congress, it seems. And obviously that situation has amplified today. And there's another still from Cornered. Weems has also created work that transcends specific concerns about race, gender, or class, especially as experienced in the United States, to address the abiding universal struggle for equity and justice. The last several works we've looked at focus primarily on aspects of American history, but in the evocative installation Ritual and Revolution, Weems broadens her geographic and historic scope by presenting photographs of ancient Assyrian steppes, Mayan courtyards, and crumbling Greek sculptures. As in the Jefferson Suite and Hampton project, the other fabric installations, the images are printed on delicate muslin banners which hang from the ceiling and create a solemn sanctuary in which the viewer can ponder the inevitable passage of time, power struggles, and fall of empires. Weems uses her own voice to great effect as the orator of the accompanying audio recording, and she serves almost as a mediator between the past and present, with her deep melodic voice wafting through the installation. She says, "I was with you in the ancient ruins of time. I was with you when you stormed the Bastille and the Winter Palace." And through these images and words, Weems reminds the viewer of the timeless nature of resistance. Ritual and Revolution ends on a somewhat encouraging note with the words, "I could see again the coming of spring's hope in the May flowers of the May days long forgotten." This refers to the International Workers' Day, a once more visible worldwide day of defiance by laborers through protests and rallies. Seemingly charmed black and white and colored, not on screen here, but there are colored photographs of young girls wearing floral garlands and reclining in a pastoral setting link a seemingly innocent celebration of spring with a call to action. Weems mimics Soviet propaganda, which often used happy children as signifiers of a positive future and into their dictates of the state. and again examines the history of revolution and human rights on a global scale. Weems' thirst for a deeper examination of the underlying causes and effects of inequality, racism, slavery, and colonialism, as well as the opportunity to bring hidden histories to light, has led Weems to spend time in the southeast region of the US and lands farther afield in the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa. During extended visits to these places, she looks to the surrounding land and architecture to create what she sees as a communion with the inhabitants, both past and present. She states, "I start every project by reading and by looking around in an attempt to develop a sense of place. It's often the little known facts and secrets that make a place or a thing or a person. The little things illuminate and reveal the essence." She quickly picks up on the nuances of a locale and its people, and a sensitive portrayal of place results, as seen in the Sea Island series, in which the artist explores the unique Gullah culture found off the coasts of South Carolina and Georgia. Because of the island's physical isolation from the mainland and their majority Black population, they were able to retain many aspects of African culture during the period of slavery and through to the present day. Gullah society, in fact, has been called the most African of American cultures. By presenting African American cultural details with direct links to Africa, Weems demonstrates a developed and persistent heritage that stands in contrast to what has often been erased in mainstream historical accounts. Many of the images and text refer to rich Gullah folklore concerning everyday modes of conduct, or giving birth, or spiritual beliefs, such as placing a mattress spring or hubcaps in a yard to keep evil spirits away. And these are all traditions that have roots in Africa. Here's an installation shot, I believe, of the show at the Guggenheim, where you can see that the series also includes a group of ceramic plates that are printed with Weems's account of her search for Africa among the Gullah. And the concept of using the plates is a tribute to the funerary tradition of laying food and dishes at the grave of the recently departed. One plate states, I went to Africa and found a bowl of butter beans on a grave, newspaper walls for the spirits to read, and a pan of vinegar water up under the bed. The series is not an idealized documentation or nostalgic tribute. She also comments on the tenuous position of the Gullah's identity and that of other people of color in a rapidly shifting cultural environment. Another plate says, went looking for Africa and found uncombed heads, acrylic nails, and Afrocentric attitudes Africans would find laughable. A year or so later, Carrie Mae Weems traveled to Africa, stopping first along the slave coast of Western Ghana and Senegal. The photographs of the now empty but once important centers along the slave trade route, such as the holding facilities on Goree Island and its notorious door of no return, which you actually see in the center panel, and the accompanying text summing the fear, humiliation, and helplessness felt by the recently captured Africans as they waited to embark on the treacherous journey across the Atlantic to a life of slavery, if, that is, they survived the Middle Passage. Moving further into the continent, Weems spent time in Mali, and I'm not going to pronounce this city right, Djinn, Mali, one of the oldest cities in the sub-Sahara. She was especially struck by the gendered nature of the architecture, characterized by phallic-shaped towers and deeply set-back entranceways, and became inspired to retell the story of Adam and a newly empowered Eve. A playful narrative is constructed using traditional African male and female sculptures placed against a backdrop of suggestive mud brick buildings in a reconsidered Garden of Eden. Weems also creates a sensitive portrayal of place in her 2002 series, Dreaming in Cuba. The focus is on the country's rich and tangled history, from its position as one of the leading producers of sugar and tobacco in the 18th and 19th century, a labor system, of course, that required hundreds of thousands of slaves, to that of the longest surviving communist state in the Western Hemisphere. Wearing attire, as you can see in the image on top, of a slave woman's, Weems wanders through a former slave barracks and along the mountainous terrain of the port town of Santiago de Cuba. She attempts to capture the spirit of modern proletarian life and the present condition of ordinary citizens now cut off from both American and Russian resources through images of everyday men and women at work and at home. Then, as you see in the bottom image, wearing military fatigues, she inserts herself into several pictures of sugarcane field workers, reminding viewers that Fidel Castro came into power largely through the support and efforts of ordinary people. She further ponders the causes and effects of revolution in pictures of herself among grand colonial architecture, as seen in this image. Returning to the United States, this series, commissioned by Tulane University to commemorate the bicentennial of the Louisiana Purchase, is an attempt to understand the many racial complexities specific to Louisiana, as well as the relationship between the New South and its problematic history of slavery and Jim Crow. As in Cuba, Weems appears as a witness to history, clothed in a 19th century style domestic worker's house dress, observing sites of slavery and antebellum pomp. Her wistful, solemn presence suggests both a longing for admission and a testament to exclusion. She also stands in front of current urban locales, quietly question the current position and the representation within some forms of media of African Americans within the larger society. We're almost through here. I'm just going to fly through a couple of things. As she did earlier in Ritual and Revolution, Weems reflects on the collective and more global human experience in a series of large-scale images created during her 2006 residency at the American Academy of Rome. She wanders like history's ghost through the streets and landscapes of various Italian cities, pondering our past and present condition. A sense of the passage of time, human accomplishment, and an individual's insignificance are simultaneously evoked as she stands before once grand monuments and sweeping vistas like you see here, much in the tradition of Caspar David Friedrich's Monk by the Sea work from the early 19th century. As she looks out over the ruins of the ancient city of Matera, we are especially reminded of the inevitable collapse of power structures. And as she positions herself in front of the assorted monuments, she wears the long black dress that has come to signify the artist's muse persona. Of this muse figure, Weems states, "This woman can stand in for me and for you. She leads you into history. She's a witness and a guide." And indeed, she uses her body to lead the viewer into the space and asks the viewer to join her in this contemplative pilgrimage by turning her back to the camera and including us in her gaze. Weems's interest in how architecture controls its subjects is revealed through the placement of her body in relationship to monuments of power, such as the Italian Department of Labor. And this work is taken inside Cinecittà, is that the right way to say that? The large studio in Rome, the largest in Europe, in fact, that was founded in 1937 by Mussolini to stage his political propaganda and was used later by Fellini. The title here, When and Where I Enter, captures one of the major themes of Weems's work, the desire for viewers to ask questions about where they fit within societal constructs, how they choose to enter the stage of life, and resist any constructs that they do not abide by. It was during the production of her roaming series that another related body of work emerged, this one looking at the position of women, and Black women specifically, within the Western art canon. This is a topic that Weems explored in earlier bodies of work, including Not Manet's Type from 1997, and in which she addressed the doubly negligible status art history has accorded female artists of color by allowing viewers to peer voyeuristically into her bedroom, as she considered her place in the field as subject, muse, and creator. As you can see, it was clear I was not Manet's type. Picasso, who had a way with women, only used me, and Duchamp never even considered me. This is one of 5 panels, and the next one demonstrates Carrie's kind of wicked sense of humor, but it could have been worse. Imagine my fate had de Kooning gotten a hold of me. The museum series continues to call into question the position of artists that have been marginalized within the art world establishment. Her presence in front of various grand American and European museum buildings, here of course the Louvre and the Guggenheim Bilbao, quietly challenges their collecting and exhibition priorities. In a similar vein, but focused on a different creative genre and with a different formal approach, Slow Fade to Black honors the many African American women of the stage and attempts to negate their erasure from cultural memory. In it, she has purposely blurred publicity images of various female performers, from Josephine Baker to Marian Anderson to Nina Simone. This lack of focus, no, your eyes aren't just having trouble adjusting, suggests that their fading physical presence, as well as society's fading memories of them, since few are included in mainstream history books. Slow Fade to Black, and here is a detail of Billie Holiday. So Slow Fade to Black was the latest work in the Frist retrospective, and for a time, right after that, she was really busy getting ready for the show's national tour at the 4 different museums, receiving a MacArthur Genius Award, the U.S. Department of State's Medal of Arts. She received a BET award, and that, according to Carrie, was the one that really got her mom's attention, because the other person who received that was none other than Aretha Franklin. Carrie's always working, and in 2014, she unveiled Lincoln, Lonnie, and Me, an enigmatic 15-minute-long video installation that is based on a 19th century optical trick called Pepper's Ghost. And in this, a strategically lit pane of glass reflects people and objects as dematerialized versions on stage. And she employs this phantasmagoria to examine her own relationship to history and to other individuals, Abraham Lincoln, of course, the President of the United States, and her friend and collaborator, another photographer, Lonnie Graham. Here, history becomes theater, as a succession of ghostly projections draw us into the strange ways in which representation seduces and manipulates, and how some are left out of history altogether. Very, very quickly, the theme of performance continues with the 2016 series Scenes and Take. You can see she photographed herself standing on empty stage sets of such TV shows as Empire and Scandal. And here she's really contemplating the cultural climate that gave rise to commanding Black heroines on screen. This was not happening in 2011 and earlier, and so she was really excited and wanted to document what is possible in contemporary popular culture. And then I believe I'll end with this. Also in 2016, she produced a multidisciplinary performance from which much of the work in The Usual Suspects, your exhibition, emerged. That performance, called Grace Notes, Reflections for Now, premiered in 2016 at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston. And it really came out of watching the killings of young Black men across America, and then the tragic events of the Emanuel 9. Of course, that's the death of the 9 African-American members of the Emanuel AME Church in Charleston. And she felt especially compelled to create this work after hearing President Obama sing Amazing Grace at the funeral of the Reverend, the senior pastor at the church. And so in that way, grace is something that she feels like is very important at moments like this. And as I mentioned, many of the works in the current exhibition developed out of that performance, which she's gone on to host at a couple of different institutions. I'm sure that she will speak more about this body of work when she was here. This video in particular, I think, is incredibly powerful. I had a chance to see it actually in Cuba at the Havana Biennial. And in conclusion, I would just say that I hope this overview of her career has indicated that although Carrie Mae Weems employs a variety of means and addresses a broad array of issues, an overarching commitment to better understand the present by closely examining her surroundings in the past is found throughout her deeply meaningful artistic endeavors. And by inserting marginalized people and hidden histories into the canonical record, she not only brings erased experiences to light, but helps to provide a more multidimensional picture of humanity, a picture that ultimately will spur greater awareness and compassion among us all. Thank you very much. And I don't know how you all are doing on time, but I'm certainly happy to try to answer any questions for those of you who want to stay over the hour.
I will actually start off with a question, but first a thank you for a wonderful talk and an incredible, rich look at Carrie Mae Weems' career. And as you know, I've known her for a long time, but there are a lot of questions that I've never asked her. And since you worked on the retrospective, I'm really curious. One thing that always strikes me looking back at her work is the incredible formal range of strategies that she's used to get at her ideas. Mm-hmm. And I also noticed, again, what she started out being a real sort of photographer. And I remember, those days hanging around the darkroom at UC San Diego and that first body of work, which is a great example of sort of personal documentary photography about her family. But she ranges so broadly. Did you ever talk with her much about just sort of how she moved from formal strategy to formal strategy and that kind of thing?
That's a really good question. And the truth of the matter, from my experience, is that she really didn't want to talk about it that much. She was so much more interested in the ideas behind the pictures, more so than how they were actually taken. But I have to admit, I was worried. I was like, somebody's going to ask me, when did she shift from, to digital photography? And I wasn't quite sure exactly when that happened. But as I was looking, again, this has provided an opportunity to revisit her work. I'm wondering if part of that shift happened when she started doing the fabric works around 1999, because I do think she hung on to film longer than most people did. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that, and I'd like to ask her too, if that kind of broke her of, using her regular film camera, and then I think she started using more digital work. But I really, I found that she doesn't really like to talk about that, or she doesn't find it interesting. I mean, for her, that's just the mechanics, and she really wants people to focus on the ideas. But that said, I agree with you 100% that part of what makes her work so compelling and her as an artist, in my mind, is so important is the fact that she's constantly shifting that formal strategy, and that even though there certainly are links throughout, the now 4 decades of work, she's not a one-trick pony. She's not just doing the same thing over and over. I think she's constantly thinking about new and different approaches to the materials and to the medium. And I think it's interesting that even she seems to be doing more and more performative works too, with grace notes and that, there's barely a photographic image in there. It's really using different people and music and language. So I think it is interesting to trace that evolution. Maybe when she's here, photographer to photographer, you could get away with asking her that question a little bit.
I know she hates it when people ask her, like, what camera did you use?
Right.
She's talked about that. That's not what I mean. I obviously, as you know, talking really about the strategy in a very different way. I also had noticed when we were getting ready for the show, she's done a lot more video than I realized.
Yes, and I think that she says that she's been doing it from her time as an undergrad, yet I feel like she really picked up the pace around 2008 with the constructing history, and up until from that point on, I feel like it's a really important part of her practice, and she's continuing to explore that. And I guess that's the medium of today. You know, I mean, it seems like a natural evolution. And likewise, when you ask her about her shift into video work, in her mind, it's very much related to her photography too. So again, a natural progression for her. Anybody else? Well, I really, really hope that things settle down and that Carrie is able to come to your campus in April, or maybe even if you do something like this, I'm sure her brilliance, her energy will come across the airwaves. She, in my mind, there's no doubt she's one of the most important artists of our times, and I wish I could see your exhibition in person. I'm very disappointed about that, but again, I appreciate the opportunity to dive into Carrie again and her practice. So thank you so much, and stay well.
Okay, thank you again.
Thank you.